Shalom. Hello, everyone. I'm among the founders of Conscious Capitalism in Israel. We are very happy to host this meeting with Professor Sisodia. We have a very respectable participants here. Almost 100 people. I imagine many more will join the conversation. Dear Raj, I cannot see your face, but you're somewhere over there. I'd like to thank you for accepting our invitation. Raj is a very good and old friend of Conscious Capitalism in Israel, and actually came all the way to Tel Aviv 5 years ago to make a presentation at the Globes conference, business conference, and help us launch our chapter 5 years ago. Raj is the co-founder of the International Conscious Capitalism Movement and organization, and a professor at Babson College. He earned his PhD in marketing from Columbia University, and he has published his important work in many books throughout the years, some of which we will discuss today. He has also done consulting work for leading global corporations. One of Raj's most important book is by the name Conscious Capitalism. I'll show it to you right here. And I'd like to, this book was authored with John Mackey from Whole Foods. And this book will be published in Hebrew in the coming months. So we have something to look forward to. So Raj, I think it would be best if you start by describing essentially what conscious capitalism means, how you develop the conscious capitalism model, as well as if you can describe the seminal work you've published in your book, Firms of Endearment.
Sure. Happy to be with you, Yael, and everybody else. I wish I could be with you in person. I cannot believe it's been 5 years since I was there. You know, time flies, but I had an incredible trip. I think I was there like 8 or 10 days. And thanks to Yael, and I went to Karen's house for dinner, and I see some other friends also on this call. It was a wonderful experience. Israel is a unique country in the world, and I hope you all are managing through this crisis as well as possible. Those of you who might be new to conscious capitalism, just sort of a brief overview and history of how we got this movement started. So let me just share my screen here, and I'm going to use some slides. Okay, I hope you can see my screen. You know, the title I like to use nowadays is Healing Our World through Business. What is the role of business in healing our world? I think we all recognize that we are going through a time where there is a lot of turmoil, there's a lot of suffering, there's a lot of change going on, and what will be the role of business coming out of that? Just to give my background a little bit, as Yael said, I got a PhD in marketing from Columbia. I taught business now for 35 years. But for about 20 of those years, maybe 20, yeah, about 20 years, you know, I was really a sort of reluctant participant. I was what I would say a market warrior. You know, I was kind of playing the game the way I was taught, and but it didn't feel right to me that business is thought of in that way, sort of dehumanized, impersonal. It's a dog-eat-dog world. It's all about profit. It's all about shareholder value. It's about using people in some ways, even customers, you know, just to get them to buy. And so I was always searching in my mind for a better way. And a lot of my research was looking at what's wrong and what can we improve in that. And that ultimately led me down this path of discovering companies. I was saying most companies spend a lot of money on marketing, and yet the outcomes are pretty bad. Customer loyalty, customer trust had plummeted, even marketing spending had skyrocketed. So we were looking for the opposite of that. And in that process, we discovered another way of being. Companies that actually were not only loved by customers, but by employees, by communities, by suppliers, etc. And the reason why is that they had a set of values and they had some higher purpose that attracted everybody to them and held them together in that enterprise. So the idea of a higher purpose, the idea of a stakeholder mindset, and then of course you need different kinds of leaders in order to implement those ways of being, and the culture also has to be different. So we discovered the pillars of what I'm going to describe as conscious capitalism, and that kind of turned my life, and that book became Firms of Endearment. That kind of started me on the next trajectory of my life, where I was now connected to my core values of who I am, connected to a higher purpose in the world, which I have now come to articulate as to bring heart, healing, and soul to business and leadership so that we can build a better world for all. If you think about those words, heart, healing, and soul, they are really missing from most businesses. Most businesses are just about the head and they're just about financial performance. Right? So we're not engaging the whole human being. Business is a multifaceted activity that can engage us in such a deeper way, and we can create value in the world in such a deeper way, but most businesses don't actually do that. So I think we're living through a time of multiple, there are crises of course, but if you zoom out a little bit, we're actually going through a period of a great awakening. This is like a turning point, I believe, in human history, because simultaneously a lot of things are happening. I'm going to talk about the evolution of capitalism as an institution. The modern version of capitalism has been with us for about 240 years or so, and I think now we're evolving to the next stage of that on a global scale. That's part of what our movement is about. There's also a worldwide recognition starting here and then spreading into other countries, the dealing with the injustices that are in society, right? Racial injustice and so forth, right? And there's a fundamental shift that's happening there in consciousness. I'm hearing some noise. If you could all mute your mics, we're getting some background noise. Make sure your mic is muted. There's also what actually my friend Lynn Twist refers to as Sophia's century, that we are living through a century when finally women and the feminine is actually going to rise and occupy its rightful place in society. After thousands of years where the masculine energy and men have pretty much dominated everything. You know, the 19th century was the end of slavery, the 20th was the end of totalitarianism and dictatorships, and the 21st will be the end of the sidelining of the feminine. I think we're going to talk a little bit more about that because I know our book is in Hebrew now on that subject. And then the planet, you know, the stewardship of the planet, and we are seeing some of the consequences of the responsibility that we have had on that. We of course have the looming crisis of climate change and many, many other environmental catastrophes that we're dealing with, the mass extinction that we're living through of species. So there's a need for us to connect to that and make sure that we are not part of continuing to damage, but actually are part of healing at a planetary level as well. So a lot has changed, a lot is changing. As I said, we're going through a significant, entry of a new chapter, I think, in human history. And as Lincoln said after the Civil War here in the US, that the dogmas of the quiet past are inadequate to the stormy present. As our case is new, we must think anew and act anew. So everything that we thought about business, about society, about government, about human rights, about environment, everything we have to rethink in a deeper way with higher consciousness. That's really the need that we have right now. It's important to recognize that capitalism, which is right now under a lot of questioning, that capitalism has actually done a lot for humanity. It's done more for humanity than almost any other idea that we've ever had. So in the last 200 years, as around 1776, when Adam Smith wrote The Wealth of Nations, and this idea that freedom leads to prosperity, societies organized around individual freedom will actually result in innovation, creativity, stimulating the economy, meeting people's needs, right? So that ultimately leads to prosperity, and that's really the magic of the market that he recognized. And since then, we have deployed that idea in a broader way or across the world, and it has actually made a massive difference. So for thousands of years, most people were living on extreme poverty. The last 200 years, that has changed dramatically. Per capita incomes are up about 1,500% in real terms, adjusted for inflation. Percentage of people living in extreme poverty is down from 90 to 9% last year. Literacy has gone from 13 to 87%. Life expectancy has gone from 28 to about 74. Right, so many aspects of human development and human well-being have improved dramatically because of this idea of capitalism. Yet at the same time, we know that there's a lot of angst and concern about capitalism, that the confidence that people have in capitalism has actually declined, especially when you look at in the US, for example, confidence in big business has gone down dramatically. It's about 23% last year, right? So there's something wrong with the way in which we're enacting this. There's more and more frustration and unhappiness. If you see statistics like 88% of Americans feel they work for a company that doesn't care about them as human beings, or that heart attacks are 20% higher on Mondays, or that 85% of people worldwide are disengaged in their work, right? So there's a lot of dissatisfaction. And then you look at the income disparities and the fact that worker salaries in the US have been flat for 40 years, worker income. And while they've risen about 1,000% for executives, right? So there's a growing inequality in society. So there's more and more concern about many aspects of how capitalism is working for not just for a few, but for many, for the majority. So I would say that traditional American style capitalism is no longer working for too many Americans, maybe perhaps the majority of Americans. You know, there's a statistic that 40 to 50% of Americans have less than $400 in the bank, and if they needed $2,000 within 30 days, would not be able to come up with it. Right? So this is pretty, stark reminder that even in the richest country in the world at a time of economic boom, the majority of people are actually struggling quite a lot. And so this system hasn't really delivered what it is capable of. And hence we are starting to see now a sort of a flirtation with the idea of socialism in the US. More and more young people especially think that that would be a better system. And there's an appeal to socialism that is always rooted in the idea of decency. That it promises everybody will get their basic needs met. But the problem is that the system doesn't work, when you actually implement it in the classic sense of government owning and controlling everything. That goes against Adam Smith and everything that we've learned. So we need to remain rooted in freedom, but we need to actually figure out how do we get decency along with dynamism that capitalism gives us. So I believe we need to celebrate what capitalism has done, but we need to elevate it with higher consciousness.
Our simultaneous translator asks if you can slow down a little bit.
Okay, sure. So we need to elevate capitalism with higher consciousness. Right? Everything that we do, we apply a certain level of consciousness. Human consciousness has been evolving continuously for thousands of years, especially in the last 200 years, especially in the last 30 years. So we need to deploy those ways of thinking and being to capitalism. Otherwise, what will happen is that it will get destroyed. We could have revolutions around the world. There are a lot of populist movements, as you know, happening around the world, uprising, economic unrest, riots in Chile and Colombia and in many other countries around the world because of the fact that a lot of people are suffering. So we know that business as usual is no longer an option. Okay, we have to change the way we think about business. And before we do that, we have to understand where did we go wrong. And I think the fundamental thing is that we need a new story of business. The old story that we have told ourselves of business is not inspiring and it's actually not working as well. The president in the US just before the Great Depression in the 1920s was Calvin Coolidge. So this is right after World War I and right after the Spanish flu. And then America entered a period of economic boom called the Roaring Twenties, and Calvin Coolidge was the president. And in a speech, he said, "The business of America is business," which is actually quite true. This is a country that was rooted in freedom and entrepreneurship, right? But the question then is, what is the business of business? What is business really about? And for a long time, we have been stuck in this mindset that the business of business is business, as Alfred Sloan said, who built General Motors into the largest company in the world, right? That it's all about making money. Milton Friedman talked about the only responsibility, social responsibility of business is to increase its profits. That mindset has actually done tremendous damage. It is really a narrow perspective on what business is really about. So there's another way to think about that, which was articulated by Herb Kelleher, who built Southwest Airlines into the most successful airline in the world, and one of the great companies, which stock market symbol is LOVE, L-U-V. It's a company that has never had a single passenger casualty until last year. In 50 years of operations, has continuously grown and been profitable in 50 years, has never had a single strike, even though they're the most heavily unionized airline, has never laid off a single human being, even though the industry has gone through many cycles. Why? Because they are rooted in this core idea that Herb Kelleher articulated, that the business of business is people, yesterday, today, and forever. We have forgotten this essential truth in business. It has to be about people, and then of course the planet, because without the healthy planet, people don't survive, right? So it's all about flourishing of all life. What we have done is put profit at the center, and people are somewhere, second or third on the priorities, or maybe even lower. So it's like we need a Copernican revolution. Remember, we used to think that the sun revolved around the earth, and we discovered actually, no, it's the other way around. We need to flip that. Profit has to serve people and not the other way around. And that's a fundamental thing. So this idea of profit maximization being the sole purpose of business has done tremendous damage. Shareholder value maximization, right? It's a very narrow approach. It's a very selfish approach, and it doesn't work. Data over the last 50 years, so since 1970, when this became dogma, performance has actually on average gone down. The more you obsess about creating, maximizing profits and creating just shareholder value, the more you end up doing things like squeezing your people and squeezing your suppliers and damaging the environment that ultimately hurt your ability to thrive as a business and be profitable. So we are in a time when there's a fundamental rethinking that is underway about business and capitalism. 2019, I think, was a turning point year, just like 1989 was a turning point year. 30 years later, 2019 was a turning point because we started to see massive shifts happen. The Business Roundtable, I think we'll talk about that a little bit later, but the largest companies in the US, their association basically said, no, we need a new definition of what is the purpose of business. It's not just about economic value, it's about creating value for all stakeholders. It's about respect and dignity for people. It's about every company having a purpose, right? So we're going through a fundamental rethinking of everything, all of the basic questions, right? Why do we exist as a business? What do we do, right? What's our goal? How do we do it? Who are we as leaders? What is the time horizon that we think about? Next quarter, next year, next 100 years? And how do we define success? Is it just share price? Is it just market share? Is it just profits? Or does it need to be much deeper than that? And that's where conscious capitalism comes in, right? For each of these questions, there's an answer at a higher consciousness level. The low consciousness answer for why is to make money. Higher consciousness is to no, we need to have a higher purpose. We need to be part of doing something meaningful in the world that matters to people, right? That is relevant today. In addition to we have to make a profit, otherwise we're not a business, right? We have to survive. But that's not our reason for being. What do? We don't just make money for shareholders. We actually create value consciously for all stakeholders. And then we create integration between them. So it's not a trade-off that if you want more profit for shareholders that you have to have lower salaries from. No, everybody has to thrive together, right? And then who are we as leaders, right? What do we care about? Is it just numbers? Is it just performance? Or is it about people? Is it about the purpose of the organization, right? About taking people to a better place? And then how does it feel to work here? Most cultures are actually filled with stress and fear. We don't want that. We want places that people enjoy going to work. They're excited about their work. There's trust, there's caring and transparency. And for each of these, I have an acronym that captures the qualities of that. I won't go into that today, but healing is kind of the definition of higher purpose, or the description. It has to be a healing purpose. That's my new book also we'll talk about. But ultimately it's about reducing suffering by meeting people's real needs. It's about elevating joy in their lives through our business and what we do, and about promoting healthy growth. But it also stands for the qualities of a great purpose. It's heroic, it's evolving, it's aligning, it's loving, inspiring, natural, and galvanizing. And then for stakeholders, the acronym is SPICY. Why spicy? I joke that I'm from India. Everything has to have spice, But it also stands for the stakeholders in the right order: society, partners, investors, customers, employees, and the environment. We have to make sure that we are serving all of them, creating value for all of them, and connecting all of them to each other so that we simultaneously enhance them. And then in leadership, it is selfless. You cannot be a selfish human being and call yourself a leader, because that means you're going to use other people to achieve your goals, personal goals. That makes you a tyrant, not a leader. A true leader is there to take people to a better place. They've gone beyond their own narrow self-interest. And then it stands for the qualities. You have to be strong, energetic, loving, flexible, long-term thinking, emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, and systems intelligence. And then cultures. Cultures rooted in trust and authenticity and caring, transparency, integrity, learning, and empowerment. Those are the common attributes. So fundamentally, conscious capitalism boils down to this idea that love and work need to come together. As Freud said, love and work are the cornerstones of our humanness. And we have asked the question, I asked it in my research, why can't these two things go together? why, this is what defines us, but we have love in our personal lives when work is separate from that and become dehumanized, and it's about, using each other, abusing each other, and so forth. That's where we've gotten to. How do we combine these two things? And that's what my research was really about in the book Forms of Endearment that we mentioned earlier briefly. And people were using words like compassion, love, caring, soulful, etc. to describe them. And so that became Forms of Endearment, which came out in 2007. I did a second edition in 2014. And we did the financial analysis after the fact. After we found 28 companies in the original research, 72 in the second edition, which fit this criteria, right? They had a higher purpose. They took care of everybody. They were loved by everybody. Their leaders cared about people and purpose, and their cultures were rooted in those things. And we found those companies, and then we said, okay, now let's do the financial analysis. We know that these companies are not seeking to maximize profits. They're seeking to achieve their purpose and take care of all of their stakeholders, right? They're paying their people better, some cases double, like Costco pays double of Walmart. They're providing much better benefits, like healthcare benefits, like Starbucks does to part-time employees. They're investing in their customer experience. They're treating their suppliers well and not squeezing them, paying them well. They are investing in their communities. They're investing in the environment. They're paying taxes at a higher rate. 34% on average. So we said maybe there's less money at the end of the day for investors, because investors always get paid last, right? But I said they're creating more value for everybody. So you have to look at the total value that they're creating. But what we actually found was shocking, because these companies outperformed the market dramatically. The original research, it was 9-1 over a 10-year period. Over the S&P 500, and then in the new book, with a larger set of companies and a longer time frame, it was almost 8-1 over a 20-year time period. So you can see dramatic outperformance even while they're creating other kinds of value. And they also way outperform the Good to Great companies. Good to Great is one of the best-selling business books of all time. 11 companies that were purely selected because of their superior financial performance. But I compared Forms of Endearment to them, and actually these companies way outperform those companies. And Good to Great includes companies like Philip Morris, the tobacco company. Right? So that's not a company that I think would be defined as great because of the impact that they have on people's health. Right? That's not what we want to define as greatness. So again, these companies make a lot of money, and money is important. Profit is not a bad thing. Profit is a good thing. It is socially irresponsible not to be profitable. Society needs companies to generate profits, because without that, we don't have taxes and employment. And without that, we don't have government. Governments cannot generate wealth. They can only tax and spend the wealth generated by businesses, and then use it for defense and for infrastructure and for public education and so forth. So money is important. Financial wealth is important for free societies to function. And these companies make a lot of profit, but it is very, very important how you make the money. Because you can make the money by squeezing your employees, damaging their health. You can make the money by squeezing your suppliers, by damaging your communities, by devastating the environment. Or you can make money while you're simultaneously having a positive impact in all those areas. The fact is that businesses create, but they also destroy wealth. It's not just well-being, having love and care in my life and not fear and stress. Spiritual well-being, having meaning and purpose through my work. Culture, what defines a good life. Physical well-being of our bodies. And of course, the well-being of our environment. A conscious business tries to have a positive impact in all of these areas for all of their stakeholders, as long as they exist. And a traditional business says, well, we're all about, shareholder value and profits, and therefore everything else is a side effect, right? The fact is that there's no such thing on this planet called a side effect. We do things and there are effects. Just because you call it a side effect, or you say it fast, or put it in small letters, doesn't make it less important. It could be the most important outcome. We need to do business with a spectrum of positive effects. So this is kind of describes the complacency or the sense of separateness that we have had in the past, where some of us are doing well and we're healthy and happy or whatever, prosperous, but billions of people in this planet are struggling to survive, right? And we can say, oh, it's not our problem, or we can recognize that actually we are all in the same boat. This planet is one system. Humanity is one spirit. Our fates are intertwined and interconnected. We have to start acting that way. because climate change is a global phenomenon, right? COVID-19 is a global pandemic. I mean, these are things that unite us. Our vulnerability as human beings is what ultimately unites us. So we've been on this journey now for 12 years. 2008 is when we started the conscious capitalism movement. We're now in 18 countries, including Israel. We're in 40 US cities. And the more we are immersed in this, the more we recognize that it really works, and it works for everybody, and that's important. It has to work for everybody, or it doesn't work at all, right? And it works for some basic business reasons. These businesses just grow faster, they have better margins, they spend less money on marketing, less money on employee turnover, the employees are incredibly engaged and passionate and creative and committed. The legal costs are lower, administrative costs, resilience is higher. There's much greater well-being and flourishing in their entire ecosystem. So it's a way of doing business where everybody matters and everybody wins. And that's very important. If somebody is losing in your ecosystem, in your entire stakeholder system because of how you're doing business, if everybody else is flourishing but one entity, one set of stakeholders is losing, then you're not there. You haven't solved the problem. Everybody has to win. And by the way, including competitors can benefit when you do business in a conscious way. You know, you elevate the game for everybody. You lift the playing field. Okay, thank you. I'm going to stop here, and then we're going to engage in a conversation, and happy to take your questions as well as we go forward.
Okay, thank you for your comprehensive overview. As you know, I'm a captive audience, but I'll try to ask you some tough questions. You know, the US has always been branded as the land of unlimited possibilities. And it's always been the epitome of capitalism. Now, I'm asking you as our American friend, along with the rest of the world, we've been watching the massive Black Lives Matter protests throughout the US. Now, while these protests originated from blatant racial discrimination, it seems to me that a broader issue is at hand here. It's more about institutional inequality and lack of social mobility. Now, while preparing for this conversation, I've looked at the World Economic Forum Index of Social Mobility to look where the US is located and where Israel is. There are 88 countries which are ranked. The US is ranked 27, Israel is number 33, somewhere between the developed countries and the undeveloped countries. And the top 5 countries for social mobility are the Scandinavian countries. As far as I know, all Scandinavian countries, there's free market capitalism. Mm-hmm. So in your perspective, in your understanding, what is the difference of capitalism from what we know here or in the US to what's happening in Scandinavia, if we want to see as a model that benefits all?
Yeah, so I think it's a very good question. I think what we have had here in the US is, it's a combination of two things, right? It's how does the market economy work, the capitalism side of things, and then how does the government function, right? What are government policies? And both of these are rooted in freedom and voluntary exchange. In other words, a government in a democracy is elected and therefore implements the will of the people. And so we want to preserve the freedom that actually gives rise to the dynamism, which gives rise to the innovation and job creation and everything else. And actually, if you look at the Scandinavian countries, they're very, very, if you look at economic freedom that companies enjoy there, it's actually very high, right? There are fewer restrictions on starting a business. It's easy to start a business. There's not a lot of red tape and regulation and so forth that limits that. So they are robust free market economies in which the government has taken on a role of providing a more comprehensive social safety net because of some shared values around egalitarianism, around, as you said, social mobility, around collective responsibility for the next generation, so making sure that children have, a daycare and those good education and so forth, right? So I think there's been a social contract there. So the democracy there is more vibrant because the people's will is being expressed. So yes, it's a vibrant free market system, and then they have chosen to have higher taxes to pay for more things. You know, universal healthcare, universal childcare, generous leave policies, etc., which are all contribute to a quality of life as well as opportunity for the next generation. So I think what has happened in many other countries, and I think in the US, is it's interesting that if you look at 1989, just to go back 30 years, okay, and remember the fall of the Berlin Wall, okay, in November of 1989, and this was a major end of a chapter in human history. Until then, the defining debate of the 20th century was between these competing ideologies, right? Communism, socialism, government ownership and control of every aspect of your life, right? Soviet Union, China, others, and democracy, capitalism, and freedom. And there was a Cold War, right? And we thought there would be a nuclear war to end it ultimately. And suddenly, without a gunshot being fired, that debate was over. And this system that's rooted in freedom and dignity for ordinary human beings and self-determination, right, is in harmony with what human nature is supposed to be about. That idea won, right, in 1989. But what's happened in the subsequent 3 decades, I think, is that capitalism and democracy were joined together, right? Free markets and free people went together. And I think what's happened in those 30 years is that there's been a divergence between capitalism and democracy. So capitalism has continued sort of without restraints, right? Companies have made a lot of money, bought back their own shares, stock market has boomed. But ordinary people feel like they are being left out. They have no power. They are not able to earn a living. Disparities have grown dramatically. The influence of business on politics has increased. You know, in the US, we have all the court cases that basically said businesses can contribute unlimited amounts of money to the government, you know, to shape policy in the way that they wanted. So we've had a kind of a rise of a crony capitalism in a way, right? Which we actually say is not real capitalism, it's capitalism. So as a result of that, we've seen a divergence. And so the people's will and what they want, right? They want mobility, right? Well, how do we fund our schools in the US? Through local real estate taxes, which means rich areas have good schools and poor areas have bad schools. So you're just locked in. The American dream is not available to the majority of Americans today, because they don't even get a first chance. Forget about getting a second chance, right? So I think we need to bring democracy and capitalism back together. The well-being in a democracy, everybody has one vote. Everybody should be respected and given opportunities, right? And I'm not talking about socialism where everybody gets equal everything, but the opportunity actually to realize your potential and do something. I think those social democracies have shown us a template. You know, the world tends to be, especially the US, very bipolar. I'm either a socialist or I'm a capitalist, right? And I go to the extremes. That's a bipolar way of thinking. There's a better way to say I need to integrate both of these polarities. It's like saying I'm masculine or I'm feminine. It's either 100% this or no. I need to integrate what is positive about masculine and what's positive about feminine, and let's integrate that, right? So we need to integrate the decency, you know, the mobility, the you know, the access to health, all of those things that socialism promises, and the dynamism and the innovation and creativity that capitalism enables, and see how we can simultaneously achieve both of those things.
Yeah, which leads me to my next question about gender characteristics of leadership, or what leadership, what conscious leadership is. You know, Raj, I have 3 sons, and all of them are in their 20s, and they're preparing themselves for adult lives. As you can imagine, I've been preaching throughout my life, educating them for conscious business and conscious leadership. But a few years ago, when Trump rose to presidency, they looked at me and questioned how one really ought to behave in order to succeed and to get to the top leadership position. And now, and for a while, it seemed like that there all over the world, there was a phenomena of Trump-like leaders. And now, during this pandemic, we see, and there's all the time Facebook slides spreading about women leadership, all the Scandinavian countries, and Germany with Angela Merkel, and New Zealand with Ardern, Jacinda Ardern, and Taiwan, they're all led by women, which are very much better combating the pandemic than the US, Russia, Brazil, and Israel.
Yeah.
So there, all these countries show completely different opposite type of leadership. So what do you think is going on here with all this feminine leadership that prevails?
Yeah, I think it's an amazing pattern that my friend Aviva Wittenberg-Cox wrote about this. I'm sure others have written about it too, but she's talked about the 9 countries, right, that were doing the best in terms of containing this, recognizing the problem early, mobilizing everybody, communicating with everybody, explaining why we need to do this, etc. And they went through this and they got out of it quickly. And meanwhile, you have 5 countries all led by, as you said, certain kind of leaders, right? US, Russia, India, Brazil, the UK, right? Some of the countries that have really struggled with this. That kind of a leadership, which is about denial, which is about bluster, which is about, domination, etc. That doesn't work. You cannot dominate a virus. You cannot declare a war on a virus, etc. You cannot use that energy to control something like this. You have to go with the flow. You have to understand the dynamics of it. You have to work with it and see what we have to do. And so I think the women that you talked about, they are bringing their full humanity to this issue, and that's, I think, what most women leaders do, right? Because they have the masculine side. You have to develop that in our society, right? That's cultivated naturally in our world, but they're in touch with nurturing, caring, compassion, empathy, inclusiveness, right? Those kinds of things which come more readily, I think, more naturally. I think that's the feminine in all of us, but women have access to that, I think, maybe a little more easier. And so I think they're demonstrating that in a very compelling way right now. And I think, as I said, this is the necessary evolution of leadership in this century. Lots of research showing this. The Athena doctrine by the BCG people, 60,000 interviews, 30,000 people were asked, what is masculine, what is feminine? 30,000 relation between the data. The traits of good leaders correlate with what is considered to be feminine, right? Caring, compassion, empathy, vulnerability, etc. So there's just a lot of evidence around that. We need to be whole human beings. This is not about going to the other pole, right? Strength without love is tyranny. Love without strength is ineffective. We need love and strength together. As Martin Luther King said, we need to be tough-minded and tender-hearted. And I don't think you would describe any of those 5 leaders from Brazil and US as tender-hearted, right? They're tough-minded, and that's all they are. It's just tough-minded. That doesn't get it done.
What are actually the implications from the change that we're seeing to the business arena?
I think the exact same.
How conscious leaders perform versus other. Actually, I'd like you to talk about the Shakti Leadership book. Guys, we have it also translated in Hebrew, if you're interested. One of the books that Raj wrote, if you can talk about conscious leadership in business.
Yes, so what we advocate in Shakti Leadership is the need for wholeness. We human beings have to become whole. The roots of the word healing, so my other book is Healing Organization, right? Healing is rooted in the idea of wholeness, right? Becoming whole, so not being fragmented or fractured, and in the idea of holiness. Human beings are divine beings in a way, and we have to treat each other as that. So in Shakti Leadership, basically we said we need to, first of all, as leaders, be fully present, right? Bring our whole selves, and then we have to cultivate the wholeness, which means we have to heal within us this division, the masculine and feminine. We have to awaken the feminine within us if we need to, and integrate that with the healthy masculine, right? And then we also actually talk about, we have to also integrate our higher self and our child self. All of us has access to the higher self, the divine self, the parent self, right? The wisdom, the meaning, the purpose, that energy. But there's also within each of us a child. About a 7-year-old child, what we were and what we experience as children imprints us for life. And if we had some wounding, if we had some traumas in our childhood, if we don't address those and heal those, we will continue to respond to situations in life based on our own traumas. And we will actually, if we haven't healed ourselves, we will actually inflict suffering on others. So we need to have that healthy inner child energy, So we need to heal those traumas and then have access to the healthy inner child, which is what gives us joy and creativity and innovation and humor and playfulness. So the summary phrase that Nilima and I have is, we're going to write a book with this title. We need to become the wise fool of tough love. You have to be wise, have wisdom, meaning, purpose, right? You have to be foolish, joyful, not take yourself too seriously, right? I think the Jewish tradition has a wonderful, emphasis on humor. All the best humorists in America are Jewish, I think. So there's been always that connection there between wisdom and joy and humor. So wise, fool, and tough and loving at the same time. So we need to cultivate all of those qualities. Some of us might have, I have a tendency to be always wise and loving, but I'm not tough enough, and I'm not foolish enough. I need to figure out how do I cultivate that, And somebody else may be the opposite, right? They're always tough and foolish, but they don't have the wise and the loving. So we need to cultivate that wholeness. And if you think about the Dalai Lama, and if you think about Nelson Mandela and Desmond Tutu and people like that, they kind of embody that, right? And I think we need that. And Herb Kelleher at Southwest Airlines, who I quoted earlier, he embodied all of those qualities. That is, to me, a whole human being, and that's a perfect kind of a leader, to have all of those and then know what is needed in a given situation. You need to be wise, or you need to be playful, or you need to be tough, or you need to just embrace it with love.
Okay, that's very interesting. Few more questions regarding the implication in business arena. In the past 10 months, just before the pandemic, we've had quite significant incidences that are going towards conscious business and caring for communities. We've had in the late summer, it was August or September, the declaration of the roundtable companies about companies needing to have purpose in their essence. And then in last December on the Davos Forum, there was a declaration coming out about the supremacy, the need for supremacy of stakeholder model. So can you elaborate a little bit on that? What happened that brought it about? Do you think it's really significant? And what really needs to be done for these declarations to become real?
Yeah, so these were very significant developments in 2019. As you said, the Business Roundtable is 183 of the largest US companies changing their definition of business purpose from economic value creation to creating value for all stakeholders, long-term society, purpose, respect, dignity for everybody. Same thing, Davos issued this Davos declaration. We've had the largest money manager in the world is BlackRock, with Larry Fink, with $7.5 trillion of assets under management. And they, for 3 or 4 years now, Larry has been writing a letter to all public company CEOs, telling them they need to be about long-term, about society, about stakeholders, and about purpose, right? And he's been urging that. And of course, our movement has been preaching this for 12 years, so we've been having an effect. So the Business Roundtable, we had one of their people come to speak at our CEO conference in October. And she said, yes, thank you to your movement, because you have moved the dialogue in this regard. And it's us, but also there's the inclusive capitalism with Lady Lynn Rothschild. There's the B team with Richard Branson and Paul Polman and others. There's the B Corp movement. There's Just Capital with Paul Tudor Jones. So actually these 5 entities have now come together under a new thing called Imperative 21. So if you search on Google Imperative 21, you will find a website that's now, we're saying we need to just collect all of our energies and move this further forward so that we really reach our Berlin Wall moment. That we want it to be that this becomes the default mode of business, that you have to have a purpose, that you have, the idea of that you just say that profit is the only purpose should be ridiculous in today's world, right? We want to get to that. And I think we're approaching that point, and I think our movement, as I said, we've been advocating for that, and now it's starting to go mainstream. Now it's no longer a question of if we should do this, but how. So the conversation has moved into how do we implement this? How do we do this? So that's really the bulk of our work now, is helping companies discover their purpose, live their purpose, helping companies develop deeper relationships with stakeholders, understand how do you listen to them, how do you co-create with them, right? The future of the business so that everybody wins out of that. How do we develop leaders in a different way? Conscious leadership. I just finished teaching a course on that, right? And how do you cultivate emotional intelligence, spiritual intelligence, systems intelligence, all of those qualities that are needed. So it is heartening for us to see these changes that are happening, and I think it's going to, the world cannot be rescued from where we are if business does not go through a fundamental transformation. Because governments cannot do it and nonprofits cannot do it. Business is causing and all the challenges that everybody else is now trying to clean up. Now business can be part of the solution and not creating the problem. So every company in the world is either today part of the problem or part of the solution. It's our choice.
But the thing here, Raj, is that as you mentioned earlier, that conscious company for their employees. But right now we're undergoing, because of COVID-19, a massive layoff and furloughs in the work world. Just only in Israel, to give you a sense of what we're going through, from March till now, we've moved from 4% unemployment to 20% unemployment. Now, many of these, those who were laid off will not get back to work because businesses will learn to do more with less. They become more efficient. Technology accelerates and innovation, and so how can we continue to show this love and care and empathy to people and to community when so many people, our employees, are being laid off? There are such tectonic changes and so many jobs become obsolete. How can we, is it not simple?
Yeah, so what's happening right now is in a compressed time frame what normally takes years or decades, right? Things are happening fast. I was talking to people at Verizon. They said we had a 5-year plan to start having more people work at home, and we implemented that in 3 weeks, right? And now in the future, we may not need so much office space, right? And others are discovering, some retailers are discovering that they're making 75% of their revenues online with 25% of the workforce compared to before, right? And what will be the new normal when it comes back? I think over time, I think many of those jobs should come back, because one thing we've realized, companies have been squeezing employees for a long time, downsizing, and all of that has been going on for decades, right? Many companies have shrunk, and the pressure on people has been rising for a long time, right? The stress levels at work have been rising. Burnout rates are epidemic in every industry. So the fact is that we have been squeezing people to do more with less, more with less, more with less for a long time. And if we just add further on that and give even more pressure after this thing comes out, it won't be right. So I think we don't want to overreact, right? We want to actually make sure that we have reasonable levels of workload on people when they come back. And one of the ideas that we'll have to be creative. One of the ideas is that's being floated is maybe we move to a 4-day work week, right, for more people, and that way we can have 20% more employment, right? Same amount of work, but 20% of people can be employed. More people can be employed, and everybody kind of shares in the downside. That maybe you take a little less pay, but you have more time with your wife. With your family, with your community, and maybe explore your other interests in life. Those kinds of things could be possible. I think, as happened in the 1920s, we had the war, we had the pandemic, and then we had the roaring 20s, right? The economy boom. So it's possible that within a few years, we will go back to creating robust growth, but do it in the right way. It can't be done in the way we did in the past. This time we have to do it so that everybody's included. Environment is actually getting better because of that, etc. We reinvent the way we think about business. So the new normal cannot be the old normal. It has to be at a higher level, right? And putting people at the center means prioritizing trying to create good jobs for people. And if you do that, there's always need, there's always need for people to be doing things, different than what we had in the past. Technology has always created, disruption and making some jobs obsolete. But a capitalist system, the beauty of that is that there's dynamic, there's creative destruction. It creates new jobs in new industries while old ones are being made obsolete. So you can't predict that ahead of time.
So I'm thinking that actually we've been presenting with you in the past few years a new framework of reference to management. And we're thinking, actually, right now we're at the midst of a crisis, and companies fight for their survival or resilience, looking for what's going to happen next month, in next 6 months. Do you think that this is a relevant philosophy or model to present them with? Is it the right time for managements at distress to consider conscious capitalism?
Yeah, I think, we wrote an article in the Harvard Business Review a couple of months ago with Paul Polman and I and Kip. It's called A Tipping Point for Conscious Capitalism. I think, this is now, what was a good idea anyway, but now this is becoming necessary. Companies are going to have to operate with purpose. They're going to have to put people at the center. They're going to have to become more resilient so that they can survive these kinds of crises in the future. All of these things are becoming more imperative, and the need for caring, compassion, inclusiveness, getting through things together has never been greater. And we are seeing, and in that article we talk about lots of examples of companies that are doing very creative things to get through this. Cooperating with each other, taking care of their employees, shifting their manufacturing, releasing their patents and designs to competitors. All kinds. Everybody is looking for ways to serve and ways to get through this. We have to get through this together with a sense of shared sacrifice, shared destiny. It's like we have had a collective heart attack. And what do you need with a heart attack? You need intensive care. And so that's what it's going to take, intensive caring for each other. The way I say it, Yael, is that we are on this planet to take care of each other, human beings. And business is a way we can do that at scale. In your normal life, you can take care of 5, 10 people at most. You start a company, you can take care of hundreds, thousands, tens of thousands of people. If you come with it, with that energy of caring and healing, which is why I wrote the book called The Healing Organization, that business actually can be healing. And it's not about having yoga studios and massage parlors. It's saying any business that you can do can be done in a healing way, where it's a place of healing for those who work there. It's a source of healing for those we serve, and it's a force for healing in society, reducing people's suffering, elevating their joy.
It's a very moving book, especially the way you describe the stoic appearance of those employees that are being hurt in their job by their employers. And actually, in the past hour, we've been talking about the rights of stakeholders and the importance of well-being of stakeholders. But the way I see it is that employers and business owners are not always the villains who inflict hurt. And there are some times that they are the one who are being hurt. And also in Israel, we've had some clear cases in the business arena. I don't want to mention names of companies where sometimes the ownership rights are being jeopardized by militant organized labor unions, even in categories that are undergoing acute disruption. So those unions refuse to accept that things have changed dramatically, and they undermine the company's chance to adapt and survive. So is it possible, perhaps, that the conversation about stakeholder rights and partnership has become a fad that sometimes goes too far at the expense of ownership rights?
Oh, yeah. I mean, when we talk about a stakeholder mindset, we have to remember investors are stakeholders, right? Owners are stakeholders. And in any stakeholder system, if any one stakeholder becomes too powerful and dominant, then that we liken that to a kind of, we call it stakeholder cancer, right? So in your body, when one part of your body starts to grow without regard to the well-being of the whole body, that's a tumor, right? And ultimately that kills the whole body. And likewise, in a company, if one stakeholder, and it's usually, in many cases, it's the investors, right? I have the most power, and they exercise it purely for their own benefit. And meanwhile, employees are suffering, suppliers are suffering, communities are suffering as a result, and that hurts the company and ultimately dies. But also with very, very strong unions, that can happen as well. If unions are aggressive, are militant, are not cooperative, and if there's a history of conflict, most companies, unfortunately, we've had hyper masculine energy when it comes to labor versus management, right? And in the US, in fact, the labor unions, the Teamsters almost became affiliated with organized crime. It organized labor and organized, the mafia was connected to the Teamsters. So there's a lot of that kind of ugly history. Unionism started for a good reason. In the 19th century, there were many. The reason we had unions, the reason we had socialism and Marxism was because of unconscious capitalism or compulsive capitalism, where people were being treated to horrific working conditions, where in Andrew Carnegie's steel mills, 10% of the people were dying every year from overwork, right? And they simultaneously increased their work week from 5 days to 6 days, and from 12 hours to 14 hours a day, and reduce their pay all at the same time because they had the power. And when the employees started protesting, they hired a private army, the Pinkertons, basically, to put them down. So that was the root of militant unionism. But today, in many companies, as I said, the unions have too much power to dictate that they should get disproportionate extracting from the company, right? See, what we say in a stakeholder universe, that when you have purpose and shared values, etc., right? Every stakeholder becomes a giver to the system. Employees are giving to that, customers are giving, investors are giving, everybody's contributing to the achieving of the purpose, right, and the flourishing of the company. And the more you give, the more you get back, right? Because the company survives, it grows, it thrives, and everybody benefits. But if everybody is a taker, if the CEO said, we're just going to maximize shareholder profit returns, then employees say, I want to maximize my pay and minimize my work. Customers say, I want the lowest price every time. I'm not loyal to anybody. Suppliers say, I want the highest margins. Right? I'm going to cut corners, cut costs. If society said, I want to tax you as much as possible. Everybody becomes a taker from that system. And that system will die. It'll bleed to death, right? So again, in a conscious company, those kinds of things normally will not happen. Most conscious companies don't have unions, not because they're anti-union, but because they are pro-people. They treat their people so well that they don't even dream about needing a union, right? On the other hand, you have companies like Southwest Airlines, heavily unionized just because of the industry. But I asked Herb Kelleher once, like, how do you manage your relation with, he said, yeah, we treat them like human beings. We all sit around the table. You don't know who's union, who's management. We're all interested in making sure that this thing works well. We want to treat them fairly, and they want the company to do well, right? So you can work with unions in that way. But
and there's also the culture of trust.
Yeah.
In conscious businesses that enables the interaction, the open communication, and it's something that's very, very significant. So we've been discussing some macro global trends, and we've been reviewing those protests in the US, but we've had also protests in Hong Kong, and we had the Yellow Vests in France, and we just recently had a protest in Tel Aviv. It seems to all of us, actually, that the COVID-19 has accelerated all the trends that have been there before. Do you think, is it possible that the pandemic is that tipping point, that things will be different later? And how do you imagine the post-era, the post-pandemic era look like for business?
Well, for society and for business, I think it will be different. Like I said, we have all these simultaneous things that are happening in the world. COVID is bringing to the surface. Suffering was already widespread. We wrote the Healing Organization last year. I published in 19. So there was a lot of suffering already that was silent. What's happening now is the suffering is not silent. Whether it's a racial suffering, whether it's economic suffering, whether it's medical, health-related suffering, the suffering, in Hong Kong about the system there in China, all of these things are coming to the surface to be healed. When suffering becomes visible, then when you go to a doctor, that's when you start to treat it, right? So I think we have to now understand how are we going to treat it, and now how are we going to prevent this from happening again, or how will we be more prepared the next time. One of the shocking things that we're discovering right now is that companies simply were not able to handle this kind of a crisis. Why? Because they had no resilience in their financial structure. Their balance sheets were very weak. Why? Because in the last 15 years, what have companies done in a time since the 2008 financial crisis, right, until 12 years? It's been relative boom in the stock market, profitability, etc. All of that has gone up. What have companies done with all of those profits is pretty much buy back their own shares and issue lots of dividends, right? In fact, about 91% of profits have gone to those two things. In 2016, actually, it was 105% of profits went to share buybacks and dividends in the S&P 500, right? Which means you're not investing in the future. You're not investing as much in R&D and capital. You're taking on debt. Companies are borrowing money to buy back shares. Why? Because that rewards CEOs and that rewards today's shareholders, right, who are sitting on stock options. So we've created these very weak structures. It's like there's termites, inside a building that have hollowed it out. It looks okay, but it's actually very fragile. So we need to build robustness in businesses in the future, so that when the next pandemic happens, and there will be more severe pandemics in the future, with a higher rate of mortality, etc. We know that, but we have to be prepared. How are we going to get through that, right? At a society level as well as a business, right? And then, of course, how do we collectively deal with the biggest pandemic of all, which is climate change? And I think all of those things will get mobilized now. We will get different leaders who will have a sense of urgency around all of these things. And people are ready to change. Attitudes are shifting so rapidly. In the US, for example, I haven't seen surveys in other, but many people are rethinking, many things about how do we organize, how do we, run businesses and so forth.
Exactly. So I would like to leave some more time for our persistent viewers in case they have some questions. But before I conclude, before I finish my part, I would like, since we have so many CEOs among our viewers tonight, what advice or guidance would you give them for those in managerial position when they come from tomorrow on? What's the bullet that you would send home with?
Yeah, I would say that, if you think about this idea of healing and think about the idea of your company becoming a healing organization, which means, as I said, it's a place of healing for those who work there. They leave at the end of the day physically, mentally, emotionally, spiritually, and socially better than when they came in. Why? Because there's meaning and purpose and respect and dignity and caring and transparency. And you have to model that as a leader. You have to show that, right? You have to show caring at a human level, and you have to be willing to be vulnerable. You have to be willing to share your own pain, share your own challenges. What I say is that there are two things that are locked away in the corporate closet. One is the human capacity for caring. All human beings are wired to care. That's part of our nature, right? And we derive great satisfaction and joy from caring, right, for others. But most businesses do not have a climate in which caring can happen. Because why? We're about winning, we're about numbers, we're about market share, we're about stock price, we're about defeating the competitors. There's that whole sort of, military energy in business. We put on our mask, put on our armor, and go to battle. So release caring, allow that caring to be expressed. Is the most abundant resource on the planet is human caring.
Externally, right? Or internally?
Both. Yeah.
Also towards your external stakeholders.
Yeah, internally and externally, yes. Towards each of us have to care for ourselves, but also care for each other, right? So release caring, and then, as you said, make this. If you could see a thought bubble over the head of everybody in your workplace and actually know what's going on in their life. Their mother just got diagnosed with Alzheimer's. Their child is addicted to opioids. You know, this happened, that. Life is hard.
Use a lot of emotional intelligence.
Right. So let that suffering become visible. Let people share their challenges. Because when it is, then the caring that we have within us, that caring can heal that suffering. Right? Because that's what we have. All of us have the ability to help each other heal. Okay, but we have to create the conditions, and the leader has to model that. So I would say become a healing leader. And in order to become a healing leader, you have to do what I did, which is I had to go on my own healing journey before I wrote that book. I literally took 5 months, and I spent time in silent retreats. I went to the Himalayas with a group. I went to the Amazon rainforest with a group. I worked with a coach. You know, I looked at what do I need to heal? What are my traumas from childhood that I have never faced? You know, what are the ways in which I'm triggered by things? How do I need to become a whole person? And I had some incredible experiences from that. Actually, I'm writing my next book now based upon that year. Of my company is called Awaken Inc. because that was my year of awakenings. You know, and I'm just going to try and share for me what those realizations were. But I think you cannot be a healing leader unless you heal yourself as a human being.
You know, there is a common sentence that says, nice guys finish last, which makes business people think that they should not be nice in business. And actually, I recommend everyone to read Adam Grant's book.
Who's?
Give and Take. Adam Grant's Give and Take.
Adam Grant. Yeah, Give and
yeah.
Take.
And there he shows all those, all that data that just, we have electrical supply. Do you still?
You can still see. Oh yeah. Okay. That's pretty good. Yeah.
That shows that givers are the best performers, just like conscious leaders.
Yeah.
So
let's make one comment based on what you just said. Nice guys finish last. First of all, life is not a race, and there's nothing about one winner. Everybody can win. Everybody matters, and everybody can win, right? And you know, Simon Sinek has a new book called The Infinite Game. Right? So in life, there are finite games and infinite games. Finite games where there's a winner and a loser. There's a limited time frame, right? Monopoly. One person wins, everybody else is bankrupt, right? That's another mindset. The other mindset, infinite game, says that the objective is to be able to continue to play that game forever. And simultaneously, everybody can thrive in that kind of mode. And I think that's what business is about. Everybody matters. Everybody can win. All your competitors can flourish while you're also flourishing. And yeah, the nicer you are, the better you will flourish. Actually.
Let's hope for a better future. So Raj, I want to thank you from the bottom of my heart for I've seen all the comments throughout the conversation coming in. It was very helpful, and we have a recording of it. It will spread beyond the over 100 participants that we had tonight. So I hope to see you soon. I hope the COVID-19 disappears soon so we can fly back and forth. You'll come to see us again.
Yes, and, I look forward to that.
Enjoy your time in Aspen.
Thank you very much. I really do look forward to coming back to Israel. Bye-bye. Bye-bye.
Thank you very much.